أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المذلومين الميامين المنتجبين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده ثم إليه ترجعون صلوات على محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Tonight is our 9th discussion on Al-Mabda wal-Ma'ad, the origin and the return. And up until this point we have discussed the idea of spiritual wayfaring or coming from Allah and returning to Him from an individual perspective. Tonight, in the first part of our discussion, we want to talk about this entire concept from a communal and social aspect. We all know that man is a social creature and that for the most part our day-to-day needs are only met when we are part of a community, when we are part of a society, and that it is not possible for at least most of us to live in isolation. When we live in a society, it implies then that there are certain rules and regulations that we must abide by. And these rules and regulations then influence how we live our lives, and also the fact then that most of our actions are then done alongside the actions of others. And therefore it is not just our individual behavior which will determine how we journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or any spiritual journey we undertake, but it is also our behavior as a community, as a society, as a nation, and ultimately as a species that is altogether determining this. How we influence society and how society influences us. And in particular, for those individuals who are religious or who have an interest in spirituality, and therefore whenever we think of matters related to the hereafter and we think of matters related to spirituality, it becomes important for us, especially those of us who are in a position of authority, who take on positions of leadership, who volunteer in communities, who get involved in the madrasa, who establish schools, who take basically a role in which they are going to influence the current and the future generation to come in our society and a community. They need to consider this fact that what sort of a society do we want and what sort of a framework do we want to work within, so that all these matters that we're talking about, journeying to Allah, spirituality, spiritual practice, finding Allah, submitting the self-will and surrendering it to God, how do we do that not just for myself but for my family and then my society, my community? A secular society or a materialistic society insists that religion and politics need to stay separate. The state and the church must always stay separate. Why? Because in their understanding, if you bring religion into governance, into society, then it violates the individual's rights. It opposes democracy. Faith should be something private, should be something individual. It should not be part of society. And it is for this reason we find ourselves today, for example, living in a society that on one hand is humane, cares for others, looks after its citizen, is very generous in helping others who are unfortunate and so on. But on the other hand, they do not see a connection between governance and social rules and how it affects men's reality or what happens after death. That is completely ignored. Is there life after death? Is there a God? Are we answerable to this God? The rules that we make, does it matter what he has to say in the rules and that we make and how we govern ourselves? That is completely sidelined, ignored, not acknowledged, and absent in society. And because generations and generations have been taught this idea that faith is personal, faith is private, it is not something that we should discuss in public, you will find that the majority, even if they believe in something or have faith in something, when a new legislation is passed, if it opposes their faith, they do not stand up and vote against it. Because they have been trained for generations that it violates the individual's right. And your faith has no role to play in how society is governed. A secular society essentially suggests that God has no plan for society. That God has left it to men to decide how to govern himself. And that God is only interested in the individual. He's not interested in you as a community. And your relationship with God is not as a nation or as a community, it is just one-on-one. This is basically the idea that is drummed into people who are religious as a whole. So, society is left for men. And it is for this reason that if you observe carefully, you will see that societies that are secular, listen to this very carefully, societies that are secular, the religion that is dominant in such a religion adores and promotes monasticism, because it ties into this idea that faith is personal and is private. So when you want to find God, you retire in a room, or you retire in a cave, or you cut yourself away from society and you find God in that manner, because God only cares to deal with you as individuals. Islam has the complete opposite opinion. Islam first sees you as an individual, but it sees your success only when you strive for spiritual perfection as a community, as a society. And that is why Islam is severely opposed to monasticism. La rahbaniyatu fil Islam, said Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There is no monasticism in Islam. It discourages you from doing that. It asks you to get involved. This is the whole principle of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. What does Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar mean? In layman's terms, it means you cannot mind your own business. You need to speak up when you have to. This was the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, isn't it? When he rose, he said, I am rising to do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar because I am seeing corruption spreading in society. And that is why we have in hadith that if a community does not get involved when the society is becoming corrupt, then Allah will appoint leaders for that society and community who will be tyrannical, who will oppress that nation. And when that happens, that society will call out to God for help, but He will not help them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah does not change the state or condition of a community until they themselves change it first. They take the initial step. You may have heard the saying that says, for evil to spread, all that is required is for the good to do nothing. If the good people just sit back and do nothing, that is all that is needed for evil to spread. So the good have to constantly be involved, taking positions of leadership, providing that vision to the community as to what is it we want to go, so that lesser qualified or people whose motives are wrong do not take on this position. Now, and that is why also when Allah speaks of resurrection, He doesn't talk about individuals being resurrected haphazardly. He says, يَوْمَ نَدْعُو كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On that day we shall summon every nation with their leaders, with their imams. So there are imams who are righteous, and the Quran says there are imams who summon you to the fire of hell. The imam is called, some of the traditionists and ulama, the way they explain it is that the leaders will be called, And when the leaders are called, the followers will automatically be pulled along with them. They will gravitate towards them. They will be just bundled and pushed along with them, that you are part of this man. He was your leader. You looked up to him. So we can take this from the perspective of our family, then we can take it from the perspective of our community, as a Muslim community, as our nation, as society, as country, and so on and so forth. And it is for this reason you will find that in Islam as well, because it gives this importance that your spiritual striving has to be as a nation, not just as an individual. That is why you will find that most acts of worship, Islam gives greater value when it is done as a community rather than individually. Look at, for example, everything we've been talking about, God consciousness, meditation, reflection. It's not, difficult to see that it's a lot easier to meditate and reflect and devote yourselves to Allah with full consciousness if you pray alone than if you pray in jama'ah, isn't it? Because you can pray privately at home, quietly in a corner, have a nice small cave where you just, worship Allah. But there is more reward in coming to the mosque and praying as a community and society where there is distraction. Why? Because Allah wants you to grow together, not individually. Look at Hajj. A lot of people who have never been for Hajj, they have this dream, when I go for Hajj, I'll be completely just me and my Lord going around the Kaaba, doing tasbih, and right? And those who've gone for Hajj are just having a good laugh. Because here you are, people elbowing you, pushing you, stepping on you, you're watching for, those people from the Far East, whose country I won't mention, with umbrellas trying to poke you into the eye, and you're trying to keep away, and right? And I've had people come back from Hajj and say, it was a disaster. I couldn't think of Allah even once. I was just trying to save my life during the entire tawaf. The whole tawaf, I was just trying to save my life. Allah throws you into that situation because the kamal is to find Allah in that chaos. There is no kamal in sitting on a mountain and worshipping Allah. The example that my uncle, Marhum Mullah Asghar, used to give, he used to say that, somebody bossed to the other and say, it's been 40 years and I've never had a traffic ticket. And people admire him. Amazing, 40 years, never traffic ticket? Impossible, how? So I don't have a driver's license. There is no kamal in that. Kamal is you drive 40 years and then don't get a ticket. So sitting at the top of a mountain and meditating and saying, I found Allah, MashaAllah, there is no kamal. Kamal is live in society, come to the mosque, do amr bil ma'roof, get involved in situations where there is conflict potentially. Get married, have children, live with family. And then conduct yourself with integrity, with righteousness. Then that is kamal. That is greatness. Because you have been through the fire and you have emerged as gold. Now I want to change over to a different subject or subtopic within our discussion completely. It is because of the lack of time, and I'm trying to complete everything by tomorrow night, inshallah, so I can make a conclusion on the final night. So this part that I've talked about was the first half, where I wanted to talk about this importance that when we're talking of spirituality, let's not just think about it individually, but let's just think as well that how can we help each other and grow together, inshallah, as a society and a community. The other aspect to this whole discussion that I have sort of left with loose ends that I want to tie up is the issue of tawheed and shirk. A major part of our discussion in all these nine nights has been about tawheed, about God, about His unicity, about God being the only reality from which everything else manifests itself, and that our heedlessness, our unconsciousness, our inability to see reality, our preoccupation with the material world, our lack of spiritual growth is largely because of not acknowledging tawheed. This has already planted the seeds in our minds as to why Islam has such a great problem with shirk or polytheism, or the opposite of tawheed. The reason is because the entire purpose of man's existence is lost once you start acknowledging anything else besides Allah as your God. Whether that God is an idol that you bow yourself before, or whether it is something intangible, an idol in the heart that you worship or adore as you should adore and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the source itself is lost and the origin is forgotten, then essentially we go through life just spinning our wheels, running after this, running after that, looking for happiness here, looking for happiness there, but we essentially do not find the purpose of our existence. This was the problem with shaitan as well. Shaitan initially was worshipping Allah. Allah did not create him evil. What happened with shaitan was when he heard that God has created another creation and is planning to appoint him as his Khalifa fil ard, as his representative and caliph on the earth, he immediately turned his attention away from God to Adam. Now he had an I. Once that I came in, so Adam became real and he became real, an independent reality. Once he became an independent reality and Adam became an independent reality, now he started drawing comparisons. Who is better? How could God make Adam the representative when I have been worshipping him for so many years? To which now Allah tells us in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7, verse 12, that when shaitan refuses to prostrate before Adam, Allah asks him, قَالَ مَا مَنَعَكَ أَلَّا تَسْجُدَ إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. He said to him, what prevented you from prostrating before Adam when I, your creator, commanded you to do so? You were supposed to have been in complete submission to me. I commanded you. إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. What did he reply? قَالَ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ. He said, I am better than him, because now he's drawing comparisons. خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. You created me from fire, and you created him from mud. Where is the comparison? Where is the fairness, O Allah? You see, he's acknowledging that his creator is God, because he says, خَلَقْتَنِي, you created me. But he is still second-guessing God's wisdom and judgment. That I am fire, he is mud. How? How? On what basis is he better than me? أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ. Now, my main concern though is the verse that comes after. That when Allah causes him to fall, the cause of his fall is the I, the false pride, the egoic false sense of self. Because what does Allah say to him? He says, this is chapter 7 verse 13. قَالَ فَهْبِتْ مِنْهَا. He said to him, get down from it, meaning from paradise. فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ فِيهَا فَخْرُجْ إِنَّكَ مِنَ السَّاغِرِينَ. It is not for you to be arrogant in it. Get out, you shall be one of those who are degraded. Now, a subtle point here for those who have an appreciation for the Arabic language. It would have sufficed for God to say, it is not for you to be arrogant. فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ. But it doesn't say فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ. It says فَمَا يَكُونُ لَكَ أَن تَتَكَبَّرَ فِيهَا. It is not for you to be arrogant in it. In it meaning what? In paradise. Which means you cannot be in paradise as long as there is pride and an egoic self. You see, if it would have said fihi, using the masculine suffix as a pronoun, then we could have argued and said maybe when God said it is not for you to be arrogant in it, the it could have been referring to God's command, to his amr. That God was saying it is not for you to be arrogant in it, meaning in my command, but it is fiha in the feminine. The ha refers to Jannah, which is a feminine noun. So it is not for you to be arrogant in it. What Allah is saying is not that you have hurt my feelings or demeaned or because you disobeyed my command, therefore my glory has been reduced. Because Allah is Ghafurur Rahim. He could have said, okay, shaitan is ignorant, I forgive you this time, but the next time I tell you, then prostrate to Adam. But no, he tells him it is not for you to be arrogant here. Meaning, if we understand paradise as the ultimate place where one is in complete submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and there is absolutely no egoic self, then Allah is telling him there is now an impossibility here. It is impossible for someone to be in the state in which he is in paradise and also have an egoic self of I that brings about false pride. And it is for this reason that we have a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam that says, whoever has an atom's weight of pride in his heart, he will not even get the scent of Jannah. You've heard this hadith, it is popular. My question is it possible for someone to have an egoic self and not have even an atom's weight of pride? If no is the answer, then that would mean the only way to get to paradise is to go in without that egoic false sense of self. It's very simple, 1 + 1. There is the real me that when it is conscious of God, it is aware of God as being my source and my origin on whom I depend, and it is able to watch the thoughts in my mind coming and going, and the rise of feelings and their drop within me. That is a part of the real me. That is the part that survives and remains posthumously. Then there is the false sense of I that I develop as an identity, as an independent identity from the time I'm a baby. Remember that whole example of the baby cries and the mother is not there to attend to the baby, and then it develops a sense initially when the baby is born, it thinks it is part of the world. When it's moving its fingers, it thinks the world is moving with it. It doesn't know it is an independent being. But then when there is conflict, the baby is crying, the mother is not there, it is hungry, it is not getting food, it slowly develops a sense of there is me and there is the rest of the world. And this world is a dangerous place and I need to fight for survival. And it creates this identity of I. When I'm completely identified with this I and I'm unconscious in the spiritual sense, that is when I'm not watching my thoughts. If somebody provokes me, I get angry, I get sad, I get depressed, I get upset, I get anxious, I worry, I fret, I get jealous. I'm completely asleep. I'm not rooted in the now. I'm not present. I'm not conscious of God. So there is a false I and there is a real I. What we are concerned about here is this false I that came into Shaitan, because of which he rebelled against God. And our concern is to break and shatter that false I, so that not that we think we no longer exist, but that we are constantly conscious of God and able to watch any thoughts and feelings that rise and fall within us. And we take our guidance constantly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Allah says, that the faithful are those to whom when a group of shaitan visits them and afflicts them or inflicts them with sinful thought, طَائِفٌ مِّنَ الشَّيْطَانِ تَذَكَّرُوا فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ. They immediately realize that this is an attack from shaitan, that this is a thought that has come into my mind or my heart from shaitan. So they secure their hearts with this constant God consciousness. It is their taqwa that prevents them from falling into sin. It is important to distinguish these two. That because we are so tightly integrated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the real me is aware of my connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I forget this when I fall asleep, that is why you will see that in the Quran, Allah connects these two and says that when you lose consciousness of God, you automatically lose consciousness of your real self. When you lose consciousness of Allah, you immediately lose consciousness of your real self and you start living with your false sense of self. Look at how he explains this in a beautiful Surah Al-Hashr, chapter 59, verse 19. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهِ. And do not be like those who forgot Allah, who forgot God. What happened then? فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. So he made them forget their own selves. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. It is these who you will find committing transgressions on the earth. It is these that you will find constantly committing sin, because they are living with the false sense of self. Now, if my I that I have created with an illusion through conflict, that false I, had any reality, then rightfully what the verse should have said is, do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He forgot them. But that is not what the verse says. The verse says, do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget their own selves. That means these two are intricately connected. You cannot be conscious of God without being conscious of your true self. And you cannot be conscious of your true self without being conscious of God. The moment you forget your true self, you immediately forget God. The moment you forget God, you have forgotten your true self. If you want to be constantly conscious of God, you will have to constantly be conscious of your true self. And hence the hadith, "Man arafa nafsa, faqad arafa rabbah." Whoever recognizes and realizes his own true self, he has realized and known God. These two are intricately connected, and they cannot be separate from one another. When you see reality as being multiple realities and having their own independence and not being connected as one to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you now live with the ego. And because you're now separate and fighting for survival, you no longer see what harm you're causing when you waste water, or when you burn down trees, or when you harm another human being, or when you loot and kill and behead others. Because you're living in the ego. You will even use Quran and religion to justify your actions. But that is your egoic self that is doing it. When people say religion is the cause of violence, it is religion in the hands of the ego that is the cause of violence. Religion in the hands of submitted beings brings peace. It does not bring violence. And it is for this reason that mystics argue that multiplicity is hell. You will remember our brief tafsir of Surah Takathur. And that paradise is where there is unicity, where there is tawheed. And so we begin to get a glimpse as to why Islam is so adamant about tawheed, and why Islam is so opposed about shirk, that it sees shirk as being in a loss and a source of all the problems in the world, all the violence and all these things. The egoic self as well is a form of the manifestation of this shirk. It is for this reason that you will find that when the Quran speaks about people running after things other than God, it does not refer to these things as an illusion. It refers to them as a mirage. Why? Because a mirage is not something you're imagining. It is an optical illusion, but it is a reflection of something real. When you see water in a desert and you think that's an oasis, that mirage that you're looking at is not something that you're hallucinating. There actually is an oasis, but it is not there where you are looking for it. It is somewhere else. You are seeing a reflection of that. So what you're running after, what you're thirsty for, is real, but you're heading in the wrong direction for it. Now look at this verse of Quran, how beautiful it is. This is from Surah An-Nur, chapter 24, verse 39. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَعْمَالُهُمْ كَسَرَابٍ بِقِيعَةٍ. And as for those who are faithless, their actions, meaning their day-to-day pursuit and hankering for the world and running after position and power and beauty and wealth and all these things that you see them running after, is the example of a mirage in a desert. يَحْسَبُهُ الظَّمْآنُ مَاءً. The man who is thirsty thinks it is water. حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَ لَمْ يَجِدْهُ شَيْئًا. Until he comes to it, the thirsty man, he finds that there is nothing there. وَوَجَدَ اللَّهَ عِنْدَهُ. Instead, he finds Allah is waiting for him there. فَوَقَاهُ اللَّهُ حِسَابَهُ. So Allah then pays him back for his account in full. وَاللَّهُ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. And Allah is swift in giving account. Do you see how beautiful this verse is? The thirsty man thinks there is water. He runs there. When he comes there, there is nothing. But Allah is waiting for him there. Now this is at the time of death, that he runs after this, runs after that, runs after that. And then when he is dying, he comes to realize that everything he was chasing was a mirage. And actually all there was that was worthy of chasing was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore mirage therefore has a very deep esoteric meaning here, that it is not just an illusion. We're not just running after things that are imaginary. We're running after Allah. But He is not where we are looking for Him. And that is why it is a mirage. And they find God waiting for him, because at that point, at the time of death, the veils drop and they now see reality. Some people took gods based on what they were awed by. If they saw a large tree, if they saw a huge mountain, they began worshipping that. Some people were awed by natural phenomena, and they thought the gods were angry with them. And that is why you find that when you see something that is unnatural, you are asked to pray Salatul Ayat. Salatul Ayat is not just because you're frightened, like when there's an earthquake or a tsunami, but even when there is an eclipse, or even when there is a tornado or a hurricane or something that frightens you or takes your attention away, it is because you should not be awed by anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To restore that idea that everything is under the control of Allah, you pray Salatul Ayat. So some human beings were awed by this, and they made gods out of that. Some human beings looked at what was precious to them and what was beneficial to them. If they relied on their animals, for example, then the cow became a god, or the elephant became a god, or if they were awed by the sun, then the sun or the moon or the stars became gods. And through this history, if you study the history of idolatry, if you study the history of shirk, you will see repeatedly again and again that shirk is actually a historic phenomena. It has no reality. Tawheed, on the other hand, is a reality. Why? Because after this world comes to an end and we come to Yawmul Qiyamah, Tawheed remains, but shirk does not remain. Even the one who denies God, even the polytheist, even the atheist, no longer denies the one and only reality. And this again then proves to us that shirk is a historic phenomenon, whereas Tawheed is a reality. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, I haven't completed what I wanted to discuss tonight, and I will pick up from here and continue tomorrow. But in summary, essentially what I will cover tomorrow very briefly to finish this subject before I talk about what I want to talk about tomorrow night, is that through these various historic phenomena, when human beings introduced shirk, with time as man acquired knowledge and science and progressed, he began to realize that all these things are myths and they're not true, and they're lies and they're superstitions. But at the same time, because he associated these with religion, and he looked for answers from religion, but religion opposed science, and religion opposed philosophy, and religion opposed metaphysics, and religion was not there to explain things as they rightfully are. Therefore, religion was thrown out with superstitions, with myths, with legends, and science became God. When science became God, man began to depend on only his thinking and his five senses. When he began depending on his thinking and five senses, he realized that these five senses sometimes deceive me. They are not always true. Because of that, he came to the conclusion that we can never be sure about anything, and therefore it is impossible to attain conviction and be absolutely convinced or know the truth in its full reality ever. And therefore human beings developed now a whole science. Today the leaders of education are considered to be the Western world. But if you look at the Western education system all the way to our universities, it is based on skepticism, on doubt, on the fact that because whatever you come up with, any theory you come up with can be challenged by someone else, therefore whatever truth you arrive at is simply a hypothesis. It is never true or a theory. And knowledge can only be something that is shareable. If it is something through faith or conviction, it falls under the realm of legends and myths and superstitions. And because human beings now made their basis of their life and their decision making and how they govern and their social rules and their education system and their entire perspective and worldview on cynicism, on doubt, on skepticism, and the human fitra, the human nature is constantly seeking conviction, seeking truth, seeking reality. These two oppositions is the cause of man's unhappiness, of man's anxiety, of man's restlessness, of man's living in such a chaotic world where he can't find peace and happiness. So we want to develop this a little bit tomorrow before offering a solution from Islam's perspective. If you look at some of the greatest scholars of Islam in spirituality, from a Sunni madhab or a Shia madhab, you will see their greatest preoccupation was, how can I be certain that what I believe in is absolutely true? You look at, for example, Ghazali, who leaves society when he has a high position, people look up to him, he's the religious head and a dean of a university. He leaves society and goes wandering. What was his, he wrote a whole treatise as to why he left society and wandered, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. His basic premise, we may disagree with his final conclusions and the truth he spoke about in its full extent, But his main concern was what? That I have all these beliefs. How do I know that what I believe is true? You look at Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra is, excommunicated from the main society. He goes and lives in a small village outside Qom for 25 years. No one knows where he is, what he is doing, until he re-emerges. And today people speak of him. What was his concern? If you read his writings and his spiritual striving, why did he think the only solution was through spiritual purification and transformation? Because this was his concern. How can I know truth with absolute conviction? And Islam to this day offers a solution, because Islam believes that it is in your nature to know the truth with absolute conviction, but to see the truth, not just rationalize it, because the mind will fall away at death. And this truth can only be found through spiritual practice. The men's today basis of education, of science, of research, of knowledge is on the premise of doubt, of skepticism, of cynicism. No one has the truth. No one can say his religion is right. You're not educated if you say the Quran is perfect. You are now basing yourself on faith and superstition if you say the Quran has no error. You're not mature in your thought if you say the Prophet is infallible. How can you say there is only one right path? Or you know the truth, right? So we think along those lines, that you have to be open to doubt, to cynicism. But therein lies the source of all man's anxiety and restlessness. And inshallah we will develop this a little bit and then offer a solution tomorrow night, inshallah, if you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight is our 9th night of Muharram. And tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, we are remembering the Shabih of Rasulullah, that son of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Aliyun al-Akbar, who was so precious to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that when someone asked Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam that Yabna Rasulullah, whose musibah was the most difficult on Imam al-Hussein, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam immediately said, he said, my brother Ali. More than his baby Aliyun al-Asghar, more than Abul Fadl al-Abbas. The greatest calamity for Hussein, the most difficult thing for Hussein was the loss of Ali ibn Akbar. He was so precious to him. Why? Because he looked so much like the messenger of God, that we are told in the books of Tariq that when people would come to Medina and they would ask in Medina that I never saw Rasulullah in my lifetime, what did my Prophet look like? Describe him to me. They would point to Ali ibn al-Akbar. They said, look at him, you have seen Rasulullah.